Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the only credit card designed for iPhone. It gives you up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase. It's real cash that never expires or loses value. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch, subject to credit approval. Daily cash is available via Apple Cash Card issued by Green Dot Bank, member FDIC, or as a statement credit. Terms and more at applecard.com. Hello and welcome to Navel Gazing, Episode 9 of Season 1. Notebook 58, page 10, September 16th, 2021. You don't measure your life the way you measure your writing. Nan. Nan is our youngest, who I encountered in the kitchen, fresh from the garret, where I had just pawed through the box of notebooks for the first time, the exercise you experienced in Episode 8. I was lolling around with a head full of frothy ideas, trying to figure out just what to make of that experience, lily-padding through periods of my life on the orange carpet. There had been something transporting, curiosity-poking, inviting about the exercise. There was something in this material. I should do something with whatever was there. But what should I do? It was in this frame that Nan discovered me. I unfolded the contents of my thought and received this life advice. In retrospect, I'm surprised that any conversation took place at all, let alone one sufficient to produce a quotation to be copied down into the notebook. Nan, who at the time was 18 and a senior in high school, liked to be in those parts of the house which had, as their defining characteristic, their sole characteristic really, was that they were spaces in which Anne and I were not. A sense of being alone that started this podcast in Episode 1 to Nan would have been heaven. I don't remember the scene in the kitchen precisely from September 2021, but my supposition is that when I arrived, Nan had been preoccupied, uncaffeinated, focused on the promise of the coffee maker. The kitchen is narrow, like a subway car, but unlike a subway, the kitchen only has one exit. There was no time for Nan to hurl the grappling hook out of the window to make the escape. Usually, Anne is the one who gets pinned down when I arrive in sundry moods trying to work out my writing out loud, which is what I think I'm doing, but which is more correctly seen as a kind of elaborate fishing for compliments exercise, where I come in waving around my latest notion, seeking universal agreement, and bristling at any corrective suggestions, which is the ritual I perform until I realize that the corrective suggestion is, in fact, the correct suggestion.
Oh, honey, it's the best part of my day.
And now you know why Anne is a saint. Mustering the social energy day after day for this kind of thing is a real chore. Here's what I was trying to puzzle out, though, as I came upon Nan. What did I owe the collection of notebooks, and what did I owe myself? I make meaning of things for a living, so these questions were more than a personal moment of introspection. They were a professional test. Didn't the notebooks demand to be figured out through writing? Wasn't there a book in this collection? Something about memory, the passage of time, parenting, attention to the divinity of life's small moments? If there wasn't a book, it wouldn't be the material that faltered. It would mean the writer had failed, that I had failed. Stand back. Hot take in the kitchen. I was in the throes of a hot take. Hot takes are the worst. The scourge of social media. They are the product of the blurting response, galloping ahead of the consider what you're saying impulse. But hot takes are only corrosive if you stab everyone in the chest with them, as if you've just said something that is blindingly obvious and elementally true, as you expect maybe marble quarries to spring to life to produce stone into which artisans will chisel your wisdom, which to you is nothing more than the smooth operation of your dandy cerebellum. When the hot takes are kept to yourself, bold, speculative, but mummified, the hot take is a crucial part of figuring things out. It's the scientist's hypothesis, necessarily based on limited information, designed to be overturned by new information or affirmed, if you're lucky enough, that it goes that way. No one could be a good observer, said Darwin, unless he was an active theorizer. Here's the theory I was testing out. If you spent a lifetime making meaning of things, which is what a journalist does, and you're presented with a collection of your own making, shouldn't you at least be able to make meaning of that? If you can't, with this zesty harvest close at hand, doesn't that render a verdict on your quality as a meaning maker? And since you've devoted your life to that meaning making, doesn't that render a judgment on your life? You don't measure your life the way you measure your writing, came back the response from Nan, which was exactly correct. It's one of the joys of parenting when you hear wisdom back from your kids. Life is about much more than what you do, even if what you do is a vocation that follows you into the kitchen, the bathroom, the corner saloon, or drives you to the corner saloon, as the case may be. The second reason Nan spoke truth is that the kind of measurement I was positing in my theory misunderstands writing and being a writer. Writing is hard, it disappoints, it's nonlinear. You may get better at writing as you age, but you level off, or you get more ambitious as you get better, which means the level of possible defeat is always the same at every level because you're always raising the bar. Also, Nimrod, just because you think you can write about one thing doesn't mean you can write about another kind of thing. And you call yourself a writer. Measuring your life by the skill of your writing would be like measuring your life by your ability to lift school buses. You're setting yourself up for failure. So I returned to the garret in the glow of my child's wisdom about the stakes of this material. Nan's wisdom helped snap the initial frenzy to definitively solve the meaning of the notebooks, a reminder that life is broader than any one domain, even for someone whose vocation is meaning-making. I was freed from my existential response, which I had blundered into, how quickly a brain can go from theorizing to theorizing about failure. So there it was, resolved to measure your life by your ability to write about your own life, even when the sous chef has laid out all the material in this tidy stack of notebooks. That would be a foolish measurement. As foolish as measuring your life by the ability to lift a school bus. I was resolved. I'm going to build a wooden boat or something with my free time. Then I looked at the box of notebooks, and then looked down at my knuckles, which were white from gripping the bumper of the school bus as I strained to lift it while Mrs. McClatchy's homeroom pressed their faces at the windows like ham in the plastic applewood package. The desire to do something with these damn notebooks was not dispelled by the visit to the kitchen and the espresso shot of unassailable wisdom. Why? I shall try to deconstruct what was going on and lay the parts out on the lawn so we can take a look at them. I will travel upstream from my impression to see if I can find the source. And I think in this exercise there are universal principles which can be teased out of what we all, by now, in this episode 9, can agree are my highly idiosyncratic ways of bumping through the world. First, I was experiencing a classic stock-taking moment, a normal kind of life-assessing moment that lands on your lapel at funerals, high school reunions, at weddings, or on vacation, when your parent fills the silences with questions about why you haven't amounted to much. And did you know your cousin Alphonse is a doctor? In a stock-taking moment, you are forced to reckon with your dreams, your regrets, your progress, and whether there needs to be a change around here. When you're a writer, everything is copy. Nora Ephron said that. So you're apt to react to personal moments like stock-taking as an opportunity to write, or at least sharpen your view of the world with the material at hand in a way that will somehow add to your writing or your powers of observation. The author Dan Pink came up with the idea for his book on the topic of regret while attending his daughter's graduation. Struck by the passage of time, he started to catalog his regrets about what he had done and what he had failed to do since his college graduation. It inspired a great book about how regret is actually a superpower when you use it right. The other common traits I see in my reaction are the traits of instinct and obligation. We all have instincts, the nudges, the inklings, the source code that guides our thinking. When one surges up from the deep shale and breaks the surface, that's the first little step in an idea that might become something. An experiment. Track these subconscious prompts yourself. You'll notice them behind moments like why and when you change lanes, how you size up a new colleague, when you know you're going to speak up at a meeting, how you know when a conversation at a gathering is growing stale, when you know you should go back home before your ailing father gets too sick. Nicholson Baker, the author, locates the growth of these instincts with the passage of time, reaching a certain age in life. In his book, The Mezzanine, he describes what the main character in the novel has come to know when he's reached this age in life. With fewer total cells, he's talking about brain cells here, but more connections between each cell, the quality of your knowledge undergoes a transformation. You begin to have a feel for situations. People fall into types. Your past memories link together and your life begins to seem as it hadn't when you were younger. An inevitable thing composed of a million small failures and successes, dependently intergrown. So I had something like this going on. I had an inkling something could be done with this material based on the thousands of stories I've written in my career. Not so much a knowledge that there was a detail in the notebooks with a story behind it. It would have been better, frankly, if after moving I had found a bag of cash in a box or a gun on the mantle of the new place or Lenny Bruce's phone number written in one of these notebooks. Then we'd have a story. Instead, the instinct here was that I could look at the material long enough and find some story that was in there. Somerset Maugham said there is a philosophy in every shave, which has always meant to me that if you were clever enough, you could take any act, even shaving, and pipe in deep meaning, or perhaps better said, you could discover the meaning that was there all along, the philosophy you were following, and then write that up. All you needed was the skill to pull off the tarp, see it, and there it was. Or perhaps you're a James Baldwin fan. The conquest of the physical world is not man's only duty, Baldwin said. He is also enjoined to conquer the great wilderness of himself. But I shouldn't have to quote talented writers to haul me into the frame of writing. I had perhaps the strongest force propelling me to follow up on this instinct, obligation to myself. Implicit in the notebook habit was an obligation to do something with the collection. Otherwise, why write in the notebooks in the first place? This line of thinking, however, could be a case of what's known as the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is the tendency to continue investing time, effort, or resources into a project or decision based on what you've already invested, even when it would be more rational to abandon the whole damn thing and move on. Just because I've invested time and effort into filling these notebooks over the years doesn't necessarily mean I'm obligated to do something grand with them. The value of the notebooks might lie in the act of writing in the notebooks itself, not in some future payoff. I can come up with answers to wriggle out of this sense of obligation. Here are perfectly good, reasonable reasons that the notebooks are good on their own terms and don't require a big summing up moment. First, the notebook helps you notice in the moment, live in the moment, by tuning your life to high alert. And that's its own reward. You see more keenly, you live awake in the world, your startled ears always hear. You don't need to engage in the big summing up dance to get all of that. Also, writing in the notebook excavates thinking in the instant you're doing it. And you can go on and then take action based on those thoughts, leaving the contents of the notebook as husks of that action that don't need another visitation or another pass. Do you buy those two arguments? Do they sound familiar? They will sound familiar to the diligent navel gazonist because they are the conclusion from previous episodes, which undermines my case. I can only pop these answers out because I loaded them into the Pez dispenser after the meaning-making exercise of going through the notebooks and trying to sum up their meaning. So those two arguments are actually the product of feeling the obligation and writing. The obligation that I was just trying to argue I didn't need to listen to. Drat. Navel Gazing is sponsored by Field Notes. Another week, the final episode of this series, but another week of people emailing me and telling me about their new Field Notes habit and what they've written down and what they look forward to writing down and what they might do with all of this someday. So if you'd like to get on the bandwagon, I think it's a bandwagon for sure, visit fieldnotesbrand.com and save 10% on your first order by using the coupon code GAZING. Also, makes a good gift for people, a subscription to Field Notes. So go to fieldnotesbrand.com and save 10% on your first order by using the coupon code GAZING. This episode is brought to you by Audible, the destination for thrilling audio entertainment. I've recently been thrilled by a novel by David Archer and Vince Vogel, and it's called The Burden of the Assassin. And I realized as I was listening to it, which is I listen to it around the house when I'm on my morning walk if Anne isn't here. It is so much fun to be in the grip of genre when it's like galloping along. Last night, I was listening to it as I was going to bed, and usually I fall off to sleep pretty quickly. But in this case, I was listening all the way up to the moment that the sleep timer goes off after 15 seconds. And it was right at the moment, like one of the things was happening. And I had to wake up to press it and listen to what was going to happen next, which is a good sign of a galloping genre novel if I've ever heard one. Audible members can keep one title a month from the entire catalog. New members can try Audible now free for 30 days. Visit audible.com navel-gazing or text navel-gazing to 500-500. That's audible.com/navel-gazing or text navel-gazing to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
A public service announcement. I have just committed what is known as an Ouroboros, a self-referential and self-perpetuating bit of discourse, which is symbolized by a snake eating its tail. Though that doesn't seem like a good thing to do if you are a snake, my research tells me that this symbol for Ouroboros is a positive one that represents unity and the natural eternal cycle of destruction and recreation. So who am I to argue with some quick internet research that affirms and elevates my impulses? Now, if you are running while listening to this little bit of logical loop-de-doo about obligations, it may have caused you to plow into a hedge or swallow you in vertigo. It almost did that to me while I wrote it, but I suppose I'm seeking to show how slippery the question of motivation can be, especially when filtered through the distorting lens of a mind trying to spin a narrative for an audience. And while we're on the topic of spinning a narrative, it turns out the story of a snake eating its tail is also linked to our exploration of inkling and discovery. According to a famous story, German chemist August Kekulé was struggling to understand the structure of benzene, a common organic compound. Despite years of research, he couldn't quite grasp how the 6 carbon and 6 hydrogen atoms were arranged. Then he had a dream of a snake biting its own tail. The image jolted Kekulé awake, and he realized that the structure of benzene might be a closed ring of carbon atoms with alternate single and double bonds. The discovery was crucial because it provided the fundamental framework for understanding the structure and behavior of a vast array of organic compounds. From pharmaceuticals to plastics, the breakthrough laid the foundation for the field of organic chemistry. The dream delivered the inkling. The obligation to scientific discovery delivered the result. This is also true of Newton and the apple from the tree, if that story is even true, and our old friend Archimedes and the water in the bathtub. Okay, back to looking just at obligations, though, and how they should or should not rule us. You can choose to follow up on an inkling. An obligation is stronger. There's more guilt associated. It's a chore on Saturday that you owe yourself. A funeral you must attend. A duty of honor we owe ourselves. We've put in the effort. We've made the promise. We've signed a contract with our future selves, and we feel pressure to stick to the terms. It's what's behind getting in the cab putting on the running shoes from that previous episode you've hopefully listened to, or you'll not know what the devil I'm talking about. When we commit to a practice like notebook keeping, it creates a sense of duty to honor that past self's effort, which must mean seeing it through to some meaningful end. When people advise in commencement addresses to be true to yourself, they are encouraging us to stick to our obligations to ourselves. To thine own self be true, says Polonius to Laertes in Hamlet. Okay, but what does that mean, be true to yourself? This advice presupposes a defined self. Everybody got one of those? Or is yourself something that has changed over time? I have already lost touch with a few people I used to be, Joan Didion wrote correctly. Is being true to yourself a challenge of definition, defining the self, or a challenge of commitment, sticking to that true self? Is it that you're not focused enough to stay true to yourself, or you don't know exactly the shape of yourself that you're supposed to be being true to? Inklings and obligations are linked. If your sense of obligation propels you to act on your instinct, you have an instinct that you should attend the funeral. And then you remember that you are the kind of person who attends funerals because you believe attendance is meaningful for yourself and for others. You rediscover your obligations through your inklings. I have a wise friend, David Onick, who made this all seem very clear to me. He told me the story of a family friend who was visiting. He didn't really want to interrupt his Saturday to go see his parents' friend, but he also knew that he believed in the power and benefit of those kinds of family connections. He recognized an obligation to that belief of his, which he had found to be durable and true in his life. And so, no matter what he really wanted to do in that moment, he trusted in the obligation to that thing that in other times he had found durable and true. As a journalist, I've always felt compelled to make chaos conform to some kind of aesthetic order. I've believed that if you sit down long enough, write enough outlines, arrange the post-it notes correctly, kill the passages and puns you've fallen in love with, and welcome the advice of good editors, that you can write a true thing. Writing is organized thinking. If you want to know something better, assign yourself the task of writing about it. When Gwen Ifill, the anchor of PBS's Washington Week, would invite me on her Friday night show, I would assign myself a story to write that Friday morning in order to force myself to do the reporting and write through the material to understand it. It was the only way I could feel I'd mastered the ideas before I went on television. It was my homegrown version of E.M. Forster's How Do I Know What I Think Until I See What I Say? But I also did it because I wanted to be worthy of Gwen. She was a model to me, and I felt an obligation to meet her example. So there was that obligation of practice to apply what I believed had been true to me and aim it at this material. And why would I want to do that? Because remember, we are in a stock-taking moment in which the evidence of a past self comes up against its current model. And the basic question, which I think is universal, is who is this me that we're talking about here? But most acutely, the notebooks were an obligation to a past self. I felt an obligation to keep faith with my younger self, who had left all of these breadcrumbs in the notebooks. Did that person have a view of what the version of himself would do with these entries? Maybe not a vision, but definitely a faith, a hope. Is there a stable, constant you to be true to, or are you always in the process of forging a contingent self through your choices and actions? Arthur Brooks writes in The Atlantic about two methods of self-creation. There are those of us who step out into the world and discover ourselves, chisel away the stone that starts in a block to find the masterpiece inside. And then there are those who forge themselves in the world, not discovering, but building, like perhaps a painting created on a blank canvas. Which are you? I think the answer comes from our experience with inklings and obligations. There is a push and pull between them. We get an inkling and we launch ourselves into it. Then, like an artist's idea, things change when you get going. The act of creation takes you well away from the impulse that kicked you off in the first place. It must. Nothing is created that is known in its entirety from the first step. So the initial impulse is vital, but then so is ditching the impulse as you're in the throes of creation. But if you're ditching impulses, what's guiding you? All the while, what's guiding you is you're trying to make each additional impulse true to the self through some act of obligation that you feel to stay on track with your vision and your values, which you have to believe in the moment are stable, unchanging things. I have now turned this decision about whether or not to take up this project of writing about the notebooks into an attempt to figure out how we build ourselves into a life, which is the larger project of this podcast. Notebook 75, page 46 to 47, September 2021. When your dog dies and your son goes to college and you are confronted with your life's work, it all boils down to one alarm. The clock is ticking. If a scream is better than a thesis, I was hearing some kind of scream. But what was the thesis? This notebook entry jumps ahead in the month of September 2021. I'm probably a couple of weeks out from cornering Nan in the kitchen, 3 weeks from the living room declaration in our old apartment of episode 1. So what is the thesis now that we've come to the final episode in season 1? Well, I found some things along the way which I wouldn't say represent a grand thesis, but which I think are very worthy little thesis-lets that deserve naming. I would not have understood that advice giving is more about the giver than recipient before this, despite having passed along the quote many times that we talk to others about the things we need to hear. I really believe, after giving it such careful consideration, that noticing is a practice, like meditation, and that noticing rewards noticing. I now believe that it is so true that attention to the small allows discovery of wonder in the world, keeps you stuck on grateful, and slows time, rescuing you from the pull of the algorithm. We're in a different age from which we need the rescue of noticing. Our minds flit because they are designed to flit. But our natural inclination to flit is hijacked. We are in an age where the vast organized skills of smart people are aimed at removing our attention from our control. And attention is the only thing that creates meaningful art, relationships, joy, love. Noticing can be a protection in that world. 3 other thesis-lets that I've found. 1, the present reframes the past. 2, you can withdraw from the world to participate in the world more fully. 3, transitions surface the longing for order, but order is elusive, which is why transitions hit us like an arrow in the living room. That's just the way it is sometimes. Incomplete, uncertain. Hang in there. It's a natural state, not proof of some disorder. I've also learned that the number 1016, the subject of the 4th episode, could have allowed a reference to Ethelred the Unready, who died in 1016, presumably, as Stephen Colbert pointed out, because he didn't see it coming. These moments of strange discovery found up here under the sloped roof on the orange carpet, that's your doing, because you drew them out of me. What was this life? What is this life? Thank you for asking. And that's where I locate the largest thesis of this project, with you. We started this podcast in the living room with a conversational bid on a lonesome Sunday. I said in this project I was sending a ping out into the world. As the first season comes to a close, I'm overwhelmed by gratitude and hope, stirred by the pings back that I have received. Most especially because what I have heard from you has been such a surprise. I imagine that some of you might join for the ride. You would connect to a story. You'd endure the jokes. You'd find a quote from someone that maybe you found useful in your day. What I did not expect was the stories you would tell me about your day, the noticing you did in the present, or the memory that came back to life for you, the recitation for me of a small moment in your day that you thought was worthy of a notebook, even if you didn't have a notebook, or a story you told me about your mom or your dad or your dog. Loves lost and new loves found. All the love that would come through those notes in response to whatever we created together in this podcast. Here's just one example from Carolyn Roosevelt.
Hello, John. You're quite right. Dropping you a note has been on my to-do list, just to ping back. Navel-gazing has become a most amenable companion to my after-work grocery shopping on Saturday evenings. But what to say? By day, a humble stationer's clerk in Harvard Square's longtime establishment for pens, journals, paper clips, and such. I've been there since 1982. By night, devoted choral singer and lover of books. In my mind, I'm in 10th grade more than 45 years late. With German on Duolingo, history, that's an independent study, literature, independent study, film history on TCM, finance and investing with Quicken, etc., choir year-round, and PE, water aerobics, a couple of times a week. It's a lot to fit in with a full-time job, but it feels like a good life. The reason I'm shopping after work on Saturday is so I don't have to on the way home from church. The further reason is that my partner, also of 42 years, can't do it anymore. Since he was disabled 20 years ago, he has been able and willing to shop and cook. But last year, he had another stroke, apparently, so it's been me on the shopping and cooking detail. Also, on his socks, brace, pants, and shoes. It's an interesting thing, a job that's only mine, and a strong incentive to keep an extremely short point of view. I keep a wee notebook smaller than my hand for the needs and plans of the next week, and a Quo Vadis text agenda as a nightly diary. It remains to be seen if I'll ever crack them open again, as the world is scarcely hungering for my memoirs. So boring, really. Nonetheless. So, thank you for sharing your thoughts about the world, the laundry, and everything. I'm really enjoying it.
It is a gift that you asked me to hold these memories in my hand because it does me such honor. No special honor due to me, just the universal honor that one feels being the human, standing so close to the light from the window into someone else's world. Being put in touch with that human connection feels elemental. Many of you told me of your notebook-keeping habit or sent me a photograph of your new field notes purchases inspired by the show, the notebook habit you were starting. This was all a surprise. Like aiming at a target, pulling the string, and instead of the arrow sailing to make a socket in the bull's eye, a man arrived with a freezing cold martini, 1 olive. Just what I needed, but not at all what I was expecting. The reason to pay attention to inklings is that your hope in that nudge will be rewarded with something you weren't expecting. So as I look back at that moment in the kitchen with Nan, and the scramble and the puzzling over what inklings we follow and why, I come on this answer 3 years later. The surprise in your response is part of the stuff I had, I guess, some vague notion might be found in the enterprise of trying to make meaning of the notebooks. You have affirmed something large, the presence of grace in the world. Maybe I'm using that word incorrectly, but I'm reluctant to let go of it because I keep coming back to it in thinking about this. In the religious sense, grace is God's love, kindness, forgiveness, which is bestowed on all of us. Since I believe in God, I see that grace everywhere in your responses. But faith and religion are not required to describe what I'm talking about. This feeling comes with other names: empathy, common humanity, community. I've experienced, in your responses to my conversational bid, something I associate with illuminated windows of houses you pass on a country road at dusk. I've mentioned this in this show before. It's a feeling that keeps coming back to me over these episodes. When I go on one of those drives, I feel a peanut cluster of emotions about the lives taking place through those windows. The runaway imagination I bring to apartment showings grabs a hold of me, and it gets going, and suddenly I see a teenager up in a bedroom practicing a guitar, a folded flag on the top of a bookshelf, a Sudoku book with curled pages next to a favorite chair, the TV lighting the corner of the opposite wall as a game of some sort plays. I feel a sense of romance and possibility, but most of all, I think I hope that whoever is in that house, that they are all right, that they're okay, and that they're happy in whatever that means. I don't know these people at all, but I feel some deep connection, and I hope in some small way that they have a good life, that they have peace, joy, and a sweetness and light in their lives. This feeling surprises me because it is without the cynicism, sourness, prickliness in the brain that I carry with me most of the time. I should note that this feeling I'm trying to describe is called Sonder, coined by the writer John Koenig. It captures the emotional response to the realization that others have complicated lives that go on in their complexity and with which we have nothing to do, but which draw us, at least out of a pointed curiosity, because we recognize in ourselves the same complexity, romance, transition, and wobble in those other complex lives whose gravitational pull we feel. That you responded to this experiment suggests to me that there are others of you out there who have a default setting of grace, forbearance, allowance, that leaves you open to this kind of thing too. You'd have slammed the podcast shut immediately if you were not of that kind. I'm thinking the Venn diagram of navel-gazing listeners and illuminated window romantics is quite overlapping. That makes me happy because I think you're out there making the world a more human place, and the world could use some assistance being a more human place. An act of creativity takes its fullest form in the space between the person who created it and the audience. Your notes have occupied that space. We write because we hope to commune, connect, understand. And in sharing your stories, you've shown me that this hope of writing can be rewarded in unexpected ways. You are a very companionable bunch out there. You are, in a sense, the tool that helped me come to see what this examination means. You helped me escape solipsism's abyss. Thank you for your forbearance and your grace and patience. I hope you found something in our float together through these waters, too. There's a lot of undiscovered country in the Pine Box, old impressions shaped by new contexts, glaring blind spots, confessions, repentance, repair. So much work remaining on being the person I wish I were, and that the author of some entries hoped I would be. The search for inner congruence by way of outward contribution through this public conversation with past selves will continue, I hope. Well, I don't just hope, we're doing at least one more season. I'm not sure what it'll be about, but I'll be up here in the garret, where the carpet is always orange, trying to figure that out. Until we meet again, keep those stories of grace coming. That's it for this 9th and final episode of Navel Gazing Season 1, or as the optimists say, see you in Season 2. Navel Gazing is produced by Cheyna Roth. Alicia Montgomery is Vice President of Audio at Slate. Our theme music is by the band Plastic Mary. Remember, send us a note at navelgazingpodcast@gmail.com and let us know what it's all meant to you. Offer your tiny little moments of the world, or thoughts about what else we should explore. What color is your favorite carpet? I'd love to hear from you. That's navelgazingpodcast@gmail.com. I'm John Dickerson. Talk to you next season.
Every single day, it's an absolute delight. I look forward to it absolutely every single day. Do you want some more?
You should do it. It must be magic.
It is magic being married to John.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.